Well, hey everybody, Dan Fitzpatrick here, stockmarketmentor.com. Okay, it's the day before Thanksgiving. I'm going to be off tomorrow. Scotty has the helm. He's going to do an awesome job, but I want to leave you with this. First of all, we've got the Qs that are just, excuse me, just barely poking their head up above the 50-day moving average. The SPY pretty much decisively so. I mean, you can see how this thing traded intraday. This is where it started today, and it just kind of ran up all the way into the close. And so this kind of bodes well for tomorrow and hopefully even into the end of the week. But we are at this point where I just draw this little box here. Okay, so we've got all this resistance from folks that bought up here. That's where supply lives. And so we could have a little bit of a tough time climbing through this, but it does look to me like the path of least resistance, at least on the major indexes, is higher. However, it kind of varies depending on what you're looking at. And so I want to look at a couple stocks today. First of all, Nvidia. Not doing the greatest. It's down below the 50. Let me get rid of this stuff. Down below the 50-day moving average, and not just for a day or two, but for the last week and a half or so. I think, I mean, the last time it was up was on the 14th. Ever since then, it's always closed like below at or below the 50-day moving average. So this is a weak stock now. Still in a general uptrend. However, with that said, I can't recall ever seeing this kind of pattern and just see the stock do that. I I don't recall ever seeing that. What I do recall seeing a lot on something like this is kind of up and down, wiggling back and forth, forming some kind of a base, and then who knows, maybe hopefully going up there, but maybe not. The bottom line is, though, we can only trade for today, and I'm not seeing Nvidia as being something that just makes me want to back up the truck and buy right here, right now. But I will compare that with Google, which, and well, I guess you could say this is Alphabet, but what I'm really talking about is Google, which is the arm of this company. It's owned by Alphabet, but it's that does the TPUs, the tensor processing units, which are basically Google's answer or alternative, I guess you could say, to the GPUs that Nvidia makes. That's a whole nother story in and of itself, and I'm not going to do it here in this video. But let's just say that what's an advantage? Everything that's an advantage to Google then is a disadvantage to Nvidia. Again, it's a really complicated relationship with respect to technology and AI and stuff like that. And I am not even remotely competent to do anything other than make a fool out of myself by giving you more information about that. But let's just say that the TPUs are in somewhat of a competition with NVIDIA. We'll put it that way. Really, really general, basic stuff. But this is what I want to look at. So this is a weekly chart. If we look at the daily chart, you can see this chops around a little bit, and it's kind of due for a rest. See a nice move here, and then a drift higher, another move here, drift here, there, then another move here. Probably, hopefully, get some kind of a drift sideways to give us a better opportunity. I put this out today like a little mental health buy. If you feel like Google's the one that got away, spend $1,000 and buy 3 shares. At least you'll make yourself feel good. Otherwise, wait for a better opportunity here. But check this out. If we compare, we're looking at Google, we're looking at NVIDIA, the Qs, and then in this case, Google. So if we zoom in this way, you can see the orange line or magenta, whatever you want to call it, that is the QQQs. The green line is NVIDIA. The black line is Google. So what do we see? Here, we'll do it this way. It's just a 3-day chart. What we see here is a clear divergence here, whereas back here, everything was going up. Everybody's happy, happy, joy, joy. And then right about here, we started to see this divergence where Nvidia and the NASDAQ is falling, while at the same time, Alphabet, which again owns Google, Alphabet is running higher. And so, in my mind, what you want to be doing is if you want to do a pairs trade, knock yourself out, buy Google and short Nvidia, buy calls on Google, buy puts on Nvidia, or sell puts on Nvidia, sell calls, never naked calls, sell calls on Nvidia. So there's a lot of different ways that you can trade this, but the point that I just want to make is this: these are two. This is a really, really interesting dynamic right here because I'm a little late to the party, frankly. I'll admit it. I never really saw Google as being a competitor of Nvidia, but that's kind of what I'm seeing happen. And frankly, I kind of think that's what the market is starting to see too. Now, the real savvy guys, the real sharp guys have been seeing it for quite a while. Me, again, I'm a little late to the party. Typically the case. I like to arrive fashionably late. And so in my mind, this still has some ways to go. It's already run. But if you want to go back and look at NVIDIA back in, say, 2000, I don't know, pick a year, 2005, 2006, 2007, that thing had doubled. And then it doubled again. And that was really way too late to get Google. Not so much. So frankly, I think it's just a matter of time before Google puts on another 30%, 35% of the price. I would absolutely be buying it, and I will be buying it on any kind of a dip, okay? By the way, one other thing, 59-minute trader. This is something that I've put on, we have put on to basically, I want you to be making money trading, like doing day trading, intraday stuff. And so if you go to the home page here, unlock your trading potential, there's me, good looking guy that I am, and you can get all the info that you need here. But this is the lowest price that it's ever been offered at. And I do challenge you to go through and look at these. Look at the testimonials and look at what we're doing here. This stuff is really, really awesome material. I've taught it for many, many years. I got people making a crap ton of money on it, and I want you to be doing that as well. So anyway, that's all I got for you, and I will see you all after Thanksgiving.